Hello, we are live, and I am just going to wait a couple of minutes, or probably actually only 1 minute because we're a couple minutes already past the hour. So thanks all for your patience. Really excited to see everyone joining. So while we get comfortable, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Say where you're from, what you ate for breakfast, or perhaps one of your pets' names, or both. So I'll let people get comfortable in the chat, hoping we can all get to know each other a little bit during this session and make this really interactive. I will introduce myself and say I'm Leo. I live in Eugene, Oregon. I have two cats named Budget and Sourdough. And for breakfast, I had scrambled eggs with spinach and cheddar cheese. Okay, seeing some waves. And while folks are introducing themselves, Mango, Shags, Rambles, Astro, not totally clear what was a breakfast or a dog there, but great names. I will get started. Feel free to continue chatting and asking questions as we go and so on. Okay, welcome to the latest edition of Datafold's virtual hands-on lab, otherwise known affectionately as the Hall. We're super excited to share what we've been working on at Datafold. Today, we're going to focus on test-driven development with dbt and our open source data-diff tool. I will also demo a sneak peek of a really exciting product development at Datafold, a VS Code extension that helps you get the most out of data-diff with convenient commands and rich visualizations. And so stay tuned for that as well. A little about myself, other than my fun intro. My name is Leo Folsom, and I'm a solutions engineer at Datafold. I joined Datafold because I realized there was nothing at all protecting me from creating unexpected data changes when I updated dbt code, and I'll explain why that is as we go through the presentation. Datafold, here we are. So just to kind of orient my story with Datafold and what this company does and the tools we're building, I did work on some internal tooling at my last company to try to solve this problem, unexpected data changes, needing to know what the impact of your data would be as you pushed code or before you pushed code. So I looked at some open source tools that worked on this. No one was really tackling the problem like Datafold head on, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity to join the team. By the end of this call, you will know what's a data diff and why you would really like to have them in your life. You'll also get started using data diff in a real dbt project. We'll run some data diffs. We'll see the tool in action. We've designed this so that you can try out the tool in real time, but no pressure. Feel free to sit back, relax, and watch, or just try it out later on your own time. Dan is here. I want to introduce Dan, who is a software engineer on our team. He's been instrumental in building data-diff, and he'll be able to help keep me on track, answer any questions that may come up in the chat. We also are very present in the dbt Slack at the tools Datafold channel. So you can see it right there on the screen. And we hope you'll ask questions there during and after the presentation. Of course, you're also encouraged to ask questions in the chat of this event, whatever is easier for you. So let's get started. The most painful thing about data errors is that when you commit them, it makes you feel like you failed at your job. If you're a numbers person who can't get the numbers right, it's tough to argue you're doing a good job. But it's more than that. It's not just about how we feel. It's not about that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. Executives, customers, and auditors really are expecting us and relying on us to get the numbers right. So for me, this came to a head while working at a healthcare analytics company. As you can imagine, the numbers down to the penny, down to the patient were either correct or not. And so when we updated a metric or a prediction calculation to be better and the numbers changed in some unexpected ways, it was really bad. After one too many conversations about how the numbers had mysteriously shifted, I decided there had to be a better way. I mentioned I built some internal tooling earlier, just a minute ago, and I was looking to increase our confidence that code changes would not break the data. Eventually, I joined Datafold, trying to help other companies get the numbers right as well. Have any of you had a similar experience? I'm guessing that might be true since you're at this presentation. I invite you to share in the chat if you're willing, if you're comfortable sharing any of your data quality nightmares. This is a safe place for that. So we're building data-diff because it doesn't have to be that way. We do have the technology to avoid this lifestyle that I've been describing. The weight does not have to be on the shoulders of individual developers to use superhuman capabilities to catch every mistake, either in their own code or while code reviewing. Similarly, progress doesn't have to grind to a halt as code changes stall in onerous and exhaustive review approval processes to prevent data errors. So you can see there's kind of two bad states. It's either you're just hoping that no one makes mistakes, or you build this elaborate process to prevent mistakes. Neither of those are actually very good situations. So I'll walk through how data-diff can protect you against either of those scenarios. Zooming out a bit, at Datafold, we think of data testing as happening either in deployment or in development. So I'll walk through what each of those means. Development testing happens way left, think shift left. So that's typically before you open a pull request. This is where you'd edit code in an editor like VS Code, which we'll be seeing later, and execute your DBT run and your DBT test. All local. No one necessarily even knows you're making the code changes. You're figuring out if they're going to be the right code changes. And that's what we're going to focus on today and where you can use data-diff. Deployment testing happens a little further right after you open a pull request. Maybe you kick off CI staging job. That is part of our cloud product, not the focus today. We're actually focused on development testing, and we've been building out this tooling for development testing because we learned from our customers that people were opening PRs just to run Datafold, and that seemed not ideal. That meant they were kicking off a lot of CI processes and doing actually a lot more diffing than they necessarily needed to. It seemed inefficient, so we wanted to shift the whole process to the left and give people tooling to diff earlier in development. If you have any questions, by the way, you are more than welcome and encouraged to ask them in the chat as we go. So let's just level set and share how we data test in development today. So I'm going to kind of walk through the current state and then how we can replace that by using data-diff. So how do you check your work today? Maybe you do nothing, maybe you write ad hoc queries, DBT tests, unit tests, spreadsheet analysis. There should be another option on this slide that's E for other fill in the blank. And this is also a select all that apply or multiple select quiz. And there are also no wrong answers. So don't leave me hanging. Leave your answers in the chat, and then we'll kind of go from there. I'm just trying to get a straw poll here. Ad hoc queries, DBT tests. All right. DBT tests. Oh, we got some multiple choice happening. No one's saying A. I will admit to in the past I have done a bit of A, but I am reformed. Love the participation. Thank you all. Okay, let's go through the options. Option A, nothing. YOLO. Pretty self-explanatory, and I think a lot of us have been there. Maybe not all of us. Ad hoc queries. So let's talk about those. They will answer questions you can think of. They might catch the last thing that burned you. DBT tests should 100% be a part of your testing framework. Every primary key should be unique and not null. Certain columns should only have a set of accepted values, and so on. But what happens when every financial figure from a certain customer segment shifts by $1? Or if every first name gets doubled, so Leo becomes Leo. There's not a test for that. You can think of infinite scenarios that you would never be able to test for in that framework. I'm going to look at the chat for a minute. Replace a BI tool source with the dev table check viz against prod. Got it. So you kind of look at the dev data in the BI tool and see if there are any differences compared to looking at the prod data in the BI tool. Definitely on the same track as what we're going towards with data-diff. Really comparing the data dev versus prod. And yeah, Adrian, all of this is missing cases, even if you do B, C, and D. Agreed. Okay, spreadsheet analysis. You can dump two versions of the data to a spreadsheet. That actually kind of reminds me of what Andrew said, comparing in the BI tool. But that can be painful, error prone. And I think we've all had some experience with the limitations of Excel. I like to say Excel is like rocket science. And so you don't want to be like NASA and, you know, mix up your numbers because Excel ran out of cells. So let's take more of a real world example and armed with these testing tools, go through an example change to a DBT project. So this should be a simple change to a DBT model. We're going to go through a few ways of testing it. We have a dimorgs model, and that's built currently on top of it's depending on the signed in model. So that would work most of the time to catch all your orgs, but we want to be more rigorous. We don't want to miss any orgs at all, and so we're going to have it depend instead on org created. We don't want to miss any orgs where there have been no sign-in events. So before we merge such a change, we want to be absolutely sure that the impact of the change is understood. When an executive or an auditor, you might be noticing a theme here, asks, why did we go from 346 to 348 customers? We as data practitioners should know the answer. So we want to make this code change. How would that work today? Well, we'd make the code update and we'd ping our colleague to review the GitHub PR, most likely. And so I know this is a little hard to read. In a way, that's the point. This is what the GitHub PR would look like if your teammate made the change and said, hey, can you review this? So you'd have to get oriented. It's not the most obvious what the impact of this change will be. There's a group by that went away. There's a few columns that were added. And perhaps most importantly, there's a source that changed. So there's a lot to dig into. Is your colleague really going to know what happened? Do they have time to get the full context? Are you relying on them to convert code to data impact in their head or go and do a bunch of manual checks? Did you do a bunch of manual checks? So let's imagine the best case scenario. You and your colleague have time to go do a rigorous deep dive into the data. And by the way, your uniqueness tests and your null value tests already passed. Let's now check for row counts between prod and dev. That's a pretty common thing to check. And in this case, we find the record counts are different. So what's interesting here is that the dev table actually has fewer records. That is not what we would expect if we are looking to catch additional signed-in events or additional org created events to hopefully increase the number of orgs that we're counting. So right away, this is an unexpected change. You could also write a query with an except clause to identify the exact records that differ. An outer join to see full detail on the missing 11 records. You can start to get an idea of what's going on, and it's definitely good that we didn't push straight to prod or our teammate didn't just trust us. Let's revisit DBT tests. In addition to not null and uniqueness tests that passed, we also had a DBT relationships test in place. This is perhaps one of the scariest parts for me. All of my DBT tests, including relationship tests, passed without flagging the issue of missing IDs. Can anyone think of a DBT test that would have noticed individual missing or modified records? They don't exist. What about checking downstream DBT models? Those all ran successfully. Again, that's good, but not enough to catch missing or modified records or additional records. What about our trusty spreadsheet? That is definitely a way of checking for differences between dev and prod, and we could absolutely download our IDs to a spreadsheet, do a VLOOKUP, and find our missing 11 records. All of this assumes we have time, motivation, discipline. It's not fair to expect this level of rigor of anyone, including ourselves. Even if we're perfect 99% of the time, we need something automatic in place. This style of testing is not only difficult and unrealistic to expect, it's inherently inconsistent because you can't test everything, and so you and your teammate will probably end up testing different things. It's just way too easy to make a basic mistake like dropping records from a core model, and this is where data diffs fit in. So a data diff is similar to a code diff. You've all seen a code diff. We saw one earlier in this presentation. And here we're looking at the difference between production code on the left and development code, which you're currently working on the right. With a data diff, we compare the data that the code creates. Consider, as data practitioners, why do we even look at the code diff? In large part, we're assessing the impact of the code change on the data. So let's look at the data diff. Let's compare every single value. We can see values that have been added, deleted, or updated. See in my notes it says pause for oohs, ahs, and gasps. Okay, should be all set. Congratulations, you'll never be able to get that last image out of your head. Every time you merge code, you'll be thinking, what's the data diff? So now we are ready to talk about how to combine data diff, Datafold's open source Python package, with DBT. So sticking to our same change to the DimOrgs model, we can use data diff to accomplish much of the testing we covered earlier, but in a fraction of the time. To use data diff with DBT, I didn't believe how simple this was when I first saw it. You just run data diff --dbt following any DBT run. Data diff compares the data from a DBT run in development to the same models in production and finds every single difference between the tables. And this is what it looks like in action, and this is what we're going to set up on your computers in a few minutes. First, the development models are built. Then the data in those development models are compared to the same data in the production models. So this is a closer look at the output. I'm going to walk through it. First, we can see what's being compared. The same table, DimOrgs, in prod versus dev. Nice. Next, we see that 2 columns were added, org name and employee range. Makes sense. Next, we see that 0 rows were added and 11 were removed. So this is a big finding that took us a while to find via ad hoc SQL earlier. But DataDiff found this right away with just one command. Keep in mind, this is also not as simple as comparing the row counts. Consider that a difference of 11 in the row count could easily and likely be explained by 13 rows removed and 2 rows added. Even scarier, what if the row count matched exactly, but 1 row was removed and 1 row was added? So the set of primary keys did not match exactly. Count star would not catch that. And by the way, you might be thinking, oh, I know how I could catch that. I could do a left join and make sure the row count didn't change. And then I maybe would also do a right join, or maybe I would write an except statement. You can kind of get the idea here, where even if you always knew exactly what SQL to run, it's a lot of work, and not everyone is going to have that fluency or experience. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to get tired, and so on. It's just not necessary. Moving right along from that last uncomfortable scenario, with those row count puzzles I was just walking through, we can also see that 112 rows had some kind of update. The values updated section helps us see exactly which fields had value changes. And it looks like those 112 updated rows had some kind of change to the created at field. All the other fields are unchanged. Good. With data-diff --dbt, we've already gotten some really nice info that under normal circumstances we'd potentially miss or need to do some ad hoc SQL or spreadsheeting to find. So this technique is easy and it can be consistently applied. This is not in my notes, but I would also add it is fun. What about downstream models? So we're looking here at the iconic DBT DAG that we all know and love. And in this case, DimOrgs has 3 downstream models that could be impacted by our data updates. You can use dbt's node selection to diff multiple models, including everything downstream. So essentially, whatever you can do using a dbt run command, you can also data diff. Just add a quick plus to your dbt run and data diff will do the rest to diff the downstreams of DimOrgs. When you run all multiple models using data diff, all 4 diffs are printed in the command line. So right away, you can see columns added or removed, records added or dropped, fields with changed values. Keep in mind, you can run data diff multiple times as you develop to test changes as you code. And in this case, I can see we're removing and updating records from downstream models called monthly financials, yearly financials, sales sync. These sound important. I'm definitely glad we flagged the impact. This is data impact on code that we didn't even touch. So good luck to the PR reviewer who's just looking at the code change in DimOrgs to know for sure that these downstreams are impacted and exactly how. I know none of you are on stage or have video or audio turned on, so I'm assuming you're hooting and hollering with delight right now. So please carry on. And on that note, we are going to dig in now to the hands-on portion of our of this presentation. So buckle up. This is about to be a virtual hands-on lab, hands-on demo. Before we get started, I need to do a couple of things to set up. I will unshare my screen briefly to reorganize it. And then I also want to give a shout out to Doug Beatty of DBT Labs for contributing to the project. And he added DuckDB support. He really had a vision for how this whole thing could be self-contained. And that has enabled this demo to be fully able for you to just get started on your local computer and get diffing right away. There are a few prereqs that I suggest just reviewing before we get started. So if you don't have any of these or you run into an issue along the way, ping us in the Slack channel and we'll try to help. You can also follow along without running this locally. So I'm going to be using VS Code. I'll follow the docs in our GitHub repo, which I think Dan will be dropping a link in the chat to that. So you should click on that and open it up. And so you can follow along right there. And we've got it set up so you can just copy and paste code directly from the README. So as you open up that README, you'll find those same prereqs I mentioned at the top. You can just go ahead and run the commands in the prereq section if you want to just confirm that, that you have them. And then the next step is going to be to clone the repo, but I'm going to walk through that live so you don't have to do that right now. And it is demo time. So bear with me for just 1 minute while I unshare, reshare, etc. All right. This is a completely live demo, so please do bear with me as I walk through this with you. And I'll be glancing off to my monitor as well. So, okay. So I hope those of you who are following along have opened up the README. So I'm going to just verify that I have the prereqs. You can do the same. One tip here is if there's a code block, if you want, you can actually copy and paste the whole thing and just paste it directly into your command line. Some people might prefer to not do that so that you, you can run each code at once, but each line at once. But that's something I learned recently. Okay, so the next step is to clone the repo and then cd into the repo that you just cloned. And you can do this from any folder. I have a special folder that I created called vhall. It's just empty, so there's nothing that's actually special about it. It could be in your desktop. All right, now I'm going to cd into the repo I just created. By the way, you can see in my file explorer, the demo repo is now here. And you might recognize some of the models from that. And then finally, I'm going to check out the DuckDB demo branch. I'm going to resize this a bit so you can see more of. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Okay, so the next step is to create. I'm going to press clear. All this does is move the line to the top, but all the code I just ran is still up there. The next step is to create a virtual environment. So this is really easy. All you have to do is follow the steps, and I'll show you what's actually happening as you do this. So Python mvenv env, what that's going to do is it's create a virtual environment called env. And if you caught it happening, what that did is it created a folder right here. So that's where everything we install, including data-diff, is going to live. So this is all self-contained within this one repo. Now we're going to activate the virtual environment that we just created. Please ask questions in the chat if you're stuck or confused at any point. I myself have been stuck and confused in the past at many points. Okay, so the next thing is just a quick upgrade of pip. Pip is what is used to install packages. So that's the thing I will explain the least right now, because I'm actually not 100% sure what's going on in that stuff. So the next part is to install the requirements. So you might have seen this before, pip install requirements. What's really going on there? It's quite simple, even though there's a lot happening. It refers to this requirements file, and you can see what's being installed and the versions. DuckDB, data-diff, and then an adapter for DuckDB. By the way, DuckDB is a database that runs locally. It's kind of like SQLite. Okay, now we're going to reactivate the environment. And that will essentially get up and running everything that you just installed. And the last step, this is, everyone should run this. It'll only be necessary for some of you, but this just unsets a variable that you might have set in the past to indicate where your profiles file is located. But in this case, the profiles file is in the repo. You don't have to think about it. And so we're just telling your computer not to use some other version of it. Okay, and that concludes the infrastructure setup, if you will. So hopefully now, at least some of you have a DBT project locally, data-diff installed, and the ability to now get started building models and diffing. So moving right along to the setup section. We're going to first establish the baseline production tables. By the way, if anyone sees me doing anything backwards or wrong, feel free to let me know in the chat. Heckling is actually encouraged. I will receive it as constructive criticism. Okay, so that was the creation of the baseline table. So this is essentially representing your prod data you might have production tables in a warehouse like Snowflake that powers your BI tools. That's what we just created with that one dbt build statement by specifying the target of prod. And this might feel a little unusual in terms of the steps we're taking. It's because we're building everything truly from scratch in a sandbox environment. So on that note, now we're going to build the development tables. So along the same lines, you probably have development tables called, dbt L Folsom or dbt D Lowen in your warehouse in a special development schema, and you don't need to full refresh or build them every time. But since in your DuckDB right now you have absolutely nothing, we now have to build the development tables just so we have a baseline. The chat's pretty quiet, so I'm hoping that either you're all just moving along swimmingly, or and you haven't just gone to take a shower. Okay, good so far. Thank you, Nico. All right, it's not just me. Great. So now we're gonna do. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so now we're gonna do something a little more manual, and you could actually do any version of this you wanted, but I've got kind of a suggested version here. So if you are in VS Code, and if you have Jinja SQL selected here, I'm just gonna change this to SQL. You'll see why in a minute. That's not critical, but it enables a little shortcut. So what I'm gonna now do is make a model change. I'm going to, in fact, this is the same model change that we saw in the demo. I'm gonna comment out the prod version of this code, and you can do that by just pressing Command / under the question mark, or you can do it manually. And then I will uncomment the dev version of this code. So this is just a shortcut for simulating a code change. Okay, now I'm gonna save that. And now this is the big moment. So pro tip, be sure to save. Yeah, Dan's got it. That has caused some trouble in the past. So be sure to save this model. And then this is the big moment where you will be able to build the model, the dev version of the updated code, and actually data-diff locally. Let me make this bigger. So that just built the model. And now we're going to see a data-diff. So we've got, oh, it looks pretty familiar. Columns added, rows removed, updated rows, unchanged rows. Just lights up my day. Okay, now let's go forward to another example that we ran through in the demo. We're gonna run dim orgs and all downstreams, and then we're gonna diff all of those models. So this is where you can see really the power of this and how quickly you can get information as you're developing. We just made one code change, we ran the models, and now we're able to see immediately the impact of not only the modified model, but the downstreams. And we can see in SalesSync, we have removed rows. In monthly financials, we have updated rows, real impacts throughout the DAG. I do want to highlight one other thing. This is a relatively new feature that we shipped recently due to clamoring demand for this feature at one of our previous vHauls, a select flag. So this actually relieves or removes the need to run the DBT model. Well, you have to run it once in the past, but it doesn't have to be the previous run, as it would be if you don't use the select flag. So in this case, data-diff DBT is picking up whatever was built in the previous run. Does that make sense? And that's why this one ran all 4 models. But in this case, even though the previous run was all 4 models, we can say, I only care about the diff of this one. So show me that, and let's see what that looks like. And there you have it. So that's the select flag in action. Let me pause. I know Dan's in the chat, but I'm also interested in these questions. Yeah, so Dan, I will allow you to elaborate on the state modified command, but we do have the ability to specify where your manifest is, and I think that should unlock some ability to use deferral. So I think that's a pretty detailed question that we can definitely chat about either in this chat if Dan you have, yeah, that's a feature request. We have some infrastructure in place that I think could make that possible, but we haven't shipped it yet. That kind of feature request, that kind of idea, definitely we are very much looking for. So please keep in touch in the DBT Slack after this presentation. Yeah, so great question as well. When you run the diff, is it a good idea to run on all data in prod or a subset? We usually have a lot of data in prod and usually not all in dev or staging environment at any given time. So I think what would be a really good idea for you in that case is to use one of our even more recently shipped features, which is a where flag. So what the where flag will do is it will filter on both dev and prod. Now, there's, I can't promise that this is going to exactly meet your use case. But let's give it a go. And let's just pick a column here. I'm going to pick num users because I know that column pretty well. So what this is going to do is it's going to look for differences between dev and prod in the DimOrg's model only for the rows where num users is greater than 1. So I'm really happy you asked that question because that is a feature that's pretty new in a very recent version. And yeah, I'm really excited to see it in action because it helps with some of those cases where dev and prod data shift. Another thing you could imagine doing with this is running a diff on just a subsection. Yeah, you could add a date parameter for sure. So yeah, you could diff just a subsection of the data because at the end of the day, all of this diffing and all of this checking dev versus prod, if you have billions of rows, it is possible, but there will be a trade-off and you might be interested in looking at a sample. Okay. Looking at the time, I am going to move on, but please continue to ask questions. I'll answer them if I can. Dan will also answer them if he can. I suggest just deactivating your environment. So just type deactivate. That's if you're done. You can, of course, leave it open if you want. And then I'll just point to this link here. So you can use data-diff in your own DBT repo by following these instructions. And just so you can see, they're pretty easy to get started. You do need to set up just a few lines specifying your prod and prod database and schema. And then there's just a few configurations that we walk through. This has been getting developed so fast that this is a little behind, so I don't even see the where flag here. So that's probably on me. And so, yeah, really hoping you all can dive in. So stay with me. I'm just going to do a little recap, and then I'm also going to preview our VS Code extension, which I am super excited about. So give me one moment to unshare and reshare again. Okay, so just going to quickly review what we went through. With data-diff DBT tagged on a normal run, you can cover your bases on testing and replace everything you see at the bottom of the screen. So assuming you're on board, you think this is cool, you enjoyed using the tool in the demo, or you want to give it a try on your own, I'll just walk through what is covered in the docs, how you can get started. 3 simple steps: install, configure, and run. That's a little mantra for you. So to install it, you will find the command that is associated with your data warehouse. You will need to update your DBT project YAML, just like I mentioned earlier. And just a note, we do support custom schemas, and we have a few examples in the docs for how you can configure your DBT project YAML if you do use custom schemas. Finally, you will need to do something to indicate where your primary keys are. As you've probably picked up, diffing doesn't really work without primary keys. So, and that's so we can stitch your prod and your dev tables together. We have a few options for that: tags and metadata, proper DBT tags, and we also have an option that saves you the trouble of adding new tags, which is inferring primary keys from uniqueness tests. By the way, that was another feature that people were really excited about, and kind of insisted that we include, and we were happy to because it makes a ton of sense. By the way, we also support composite primary keys. So now that you've installed and configured your project, you are ready to start diffing. As we saw in the demo, you can either run dbt and data-diff in a single command, run it in separate commands, do a few dbt runs as you iterate, use the select flag, use the where flag. There's also a JSON flag to generate structured JSON output instead of the pretty printed output. It's up to you. And we're developing every day. There's multiple releases every week, at least recently. So it's been really exciting to be a part of that. Just to review, I mentioned this, so I don't want to waste your time, but just to review a couple of the recent features, there is the select flag, there is the where flag, and as I mentioned, there's the JSON flag, which was just released, so it didn't make it into the deck, but that one will really unlock some opportunities to potentially connect this to downstream technical systems and not just a human reader. So to learn more, here is the link to the docs that I was showing you earlier. There's also a fun QR code if you want to open it on your phone. And before I go further, I am going to give you a sneak preview of our VS Code extension. So this is very beta. The reason this is relevant, by the way, you might be thinking, why am I talking about the VS Code extension? I thought this was about data-diff. It's because the VS Code extension gives you a new way of using data-diff. So I'm just going to show you a couple of the things that it does. And in the future, I would love to get any of you trying this out, maybe as a beta tester, if it's interesting to you once you see it. So bear with me again while I unshare and reshare once again. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So you might have noticed, actually you probably didn't because I was zoomed in too much, but now you will notice that in addition to my DBT power user icon right here, there's also this nifty data diff icon. So what might this be used for? Okay, so I'm actually going to check out a different branch. Okay, so this is just a little bit of setup. Bear with me while it does a bit of installation. Okay, so now with this package installed, we can do Command-Shift-P, open the control panel, and we can diff a DBT model. So in this case, I apologize. Thanks for asking a good question while I sort out my setup. I'm gonna just open a new VS Code window. All right, let's try it this way. Let's try it this way. All right, so mixing and matching demos here. Here we go. All right, so everyone look at the screen again. So here, by opening up the Datafold bird in the VS Code left sidebar, I can now actually browse my file directory of my DBT models, and I can click play here. And what this is going to do is this is going to diff dimorgs comparing dev to prod. So this is saving you typing data-diff dbt, which is nice, but there's a little bit more to it. The output then looks more like this. So we've got those 11 rows removed, columns with differences created at subplan. And then if you click on more info, we can actually see these value level differences. So these are the rows removed, 11 primary keys removed. And then we can also see data changes. So this is the data in production, and this is the data in development. And you can see here also, in this particular version of my model, I added a case statement that updated subplan to individual if num users equals 1. So that's what I'm seeing here. You can open the command palette and run, so again, Command-Shift-P. And there's there's actually a whole walkthrough for installing the data-diff package. You can also diff the latest DBT run results. That's very similar to tagging the DBT data-diff command at the end of your DBT run. And one thing that I think is pretty nifty is if you open up these settings, let me find this. Here. Yep, if you open up these settings, sorry about that. I'm still learning how to use this tool because it's hot off the press. You can turn on this watch mode. What that will do is it'll actually search for changes in your run results, and it'll diff models that are included in that file. So watch mode is on right now. So what I'm going to do now is close out of this. I'll make one more change. I'll call this test. So I'm making a new change to dimorgs. And now I'm going to dbt run select dimorgs. Great question, Justin. Yes, this will definitely incur warehouse cost. Any query on your warehouse will incur a cost. So that is one of the trade-offs that I very much encourage teams to consider as they decide what the right balance is in terms of testing strategy. So I think watch mode maybe needs a little bit of TLC. It looks like that's not quite up and running, at least in my version. But that is something that's in the works, and the vision here is that you'd be able to basically run a DBT model, and then as you run it, see the results pop up just like this. So apologies for this super kind of bleeding edge demo, but I really did want to share this and kind of see and get you a chance to see what some of our future vision for this tool is. Yes, agreed with the chat. There is always a trade-off between the cost of an error and the cost of running your warehouse extra to prevent an error. That is the eternal debate. Okay, we are running up on time. So I just want to thank everyone who has made this VHAL possible on so many levels. Sarah Barabbas has been instrumental in organizing, coaching, helping me art design this backdrop just now. Dan Lowen, as I mentioned, has done a phenomenal job of leading the development of data-diff DBT integration. The rest of the Datafold team has really been increasingly jumping in and all hands on deck, just doing amazing work, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. If you have questions, find us in Tools Datafold. You can also open issues, bug reports, feature requests straight in GitHub. We're really excited about data-diff. We believe in it. I really hope you give it a try after this presentation, and please do keep in touch. Finally, some housekeeping announcements. Our next event, Data Quality Meetup, DQM, my second favorite acronym at Datafold behind VHAL. The next one is on Thursday, July 27th at noon Eastern. And the topic will be data migrations and the role of DBT. Maybe some of you have been involved in a data migration. Maybe you know that one is in your future. I hope you'll join. And it's always a good time. We always hear from really interesting presenters. We've got folks from Fitogram, Fair, and more. Our CEO Gleb will moderate. So you can scan the QR code or find the link on our website. So that concludes our lab for today. I'm going to scroll through the chat, see if there's any outstanding questions, and I'll respond live for the next couple of minutes. And as I mentioned, keep in touch. Tools Datafold in the DBT Slack, and Sarah's going to send out a recording of this session in the next day or two. So thanks again for joining, and hope to be in touch. Now I will scroll through the chat. Looks like some good discussion about cost. Yeah, absolutely. You know, we don't want to be that company that says you can do anything and it'll cost nothing. That's just not true. So some of the ideas in the chat are really good and stuff we can possibly consider adding to help you get that visibility into the cost and the trade-off of making sure, you know, checking every value, running these data diffs in development. Query labels on BigQuery. I am not sure. Dan may have an answer. All right. Otherwise, yeah. So that could be a feature request going forward. Thanks, Dan. I'm not quite as familiar with BigQuery myself. Now would be a good time for there to be a very small jazz band in my walk-in closet as folks mill around toward the exit. All right, looks like we're wrapping up. Definitely feel free to keep the discussion going in Tools Datafold in the DBT Slack. If there's a question that you haven't had answered, or if you think of it at the last minute and you don't get an answer, Awesome. Really exciting, Robert, that we're in your backlog. Let's make it happen. Okay, let's close out then. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really enjoyed the time today.